This is an object that was included in the first volume of the catalogue. It's a beautiful French Virgin and Child of about 1320 to 1330, carved from a fruit wood, hardwood, and it has exquisite detail in the face of the Virgin and so on. But it does reveal the hard life that a lot of these objects had from the 14th century onwards. Clearly, it originally would have had paint on it, and there were just tiny traces of it deep in the crevices of the drapery, and also gilding as well to emphasise its precious qualities. It's a very fine piece though, and relates very much to other Virgin and Child statuettes in other materials, ivory for instance, although it has to be said rather curiously that wood Virgin and Childs of this size are actually rarer than ivory Virgin and Childs. There are larger numbers of ivories than there are wood sculptures of this size in 14th and 15th century royal inventories. People like Charles V of France owned pieces just like this that are described in some detail in their inventories. And you can just imagine them being in private chapels, being prayed to as objects of private devotion. There was this great efflorescence of devotion to the Virgin in the 13th and 14th centuries, and these types of little statuettes are the exemplification, if you like, of that personal devotion. They do follow the form of larger sculptures, which must have acted as models, as prototypes for the smaller pieces. This typical drapery swinging across the lower body in this way, and the slightly hip-shot stance, the swaying stance you see on a good number of Virgins on the fronts of cathedrals and so on from the late 13th century and early 14th century. But this piece is so splendid because of its scale, and the fact that you feel very tempted to pick it up and to turn it in your hands, just as the owner may well have done. As I said, it has a number of changes to it that wouldn't have been present when it was acquired, when it was commissioned. The Christ child has been damaged, there are cracks, and the crown, which although it's been very nicely reconstructed in the 19th century probably, originally undoubtedly would have been gilt copper with jewels or glass cabochons on the crown. But you still get a great sense of the preciosity of the piece here and the touching relationship between the Virgin and the Christ child. All in all, a very rare piece. It fits into the collection in any number of ways. It complements the ivory, as I mentioned earlier. The Wyvern Collection has a good number of ivory Virgin and Childs, both standing and seated. And so it shows another aspect of sort of devotional practice, personal devotional practice. It also, as I say, relates to large-scale sculpture, and there are a good number, 3 or 4 extremely good French 14th century Virgin and Childs in stone on a larger scale that are in the collection. So it relates to them as well, but it fits fair and square into that world of cultured piety of the first half of the 14th century. It in a sense exemplifies that.